It sounds like we want to break. So that was what I took away from it. I took away the people don't want any regulation.
Oh, there was 10 of them. Yeah.
And then apparently I could be the rest that
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just gonna win that tonight.
Well, it won't come, but.
Are we ready to start? Okay. So I'm going to call the planning board together so that we can start. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Not hearing anything. So let's move on to privilege of the floor. Is there anyone who, Rhonda? You need to unmute.
I have to,
Oh, you have to do it.
I have to do it on the other computer. Too many computers.
Would you all mind speaking into the mic, please, so that we can hear you? Because we cannot hear you. So that's the first thing I would like to say. The second thing is, I have a question for David. As you may know, I have asked numerous times of the town board to explain to me how the person at 116 South Danby Road can be living in what is considered by most people to be an RV. And I have gotten no response, not even from the CEO. I have also looked at the zoning ordinance and have found nothing in the zoning ordinance that allows this. So I have about 2 minutes left. David, could you explain to me how this person is allowed to live in this building, this structure?
Sure, the Danby code allows people to live in a trailer while they are building a house, and while they're working towards that goal. It's a limited time frame, but that's what that falls under.
So is there anything from that has gone to the planning board about this proposed house that he is planning to build?
No,
So why is he being allowed to live in the structure when he has submitted nothing to the planning board?
the way it is.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Another change.
Yep.
Ah,
Adjust the camera.
yeah. but these one.
If I would, I'd like to reiterate what Rhonda said in the beginning. Most of you are barely audible.
He said they can't hear us.
Yeah. He says he can't hear us.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay, I will speak more directly into it.
thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else for privilege of the floor? And Rhonda, are you finished?
I am finished, and I'm sorry that nobody has submitted anything to the planning board, and I think the planning board should be concerned about that.
Okay. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to read them? Can I have a motion to accept from someone
I accept the minutes.
and a second?
I second.
Everyone? Okay. Leslie isn't here. Joel, do you have? Well, Leslie's up there. Leslie or Joel, do you have something to share with us from the town board reports?
I leave it to Leslie to give you the report. I expect if you'll be willing, we might have something to say later on when you get to the short-term rental survey results.
Okay. But there's no other updates, you're saying?
Well, I'm saying Leslie could do that.
Maybe
Leslie?
she can't hear you, Joel. Hi, Jody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the short-term rental, I mean, there's things that could get reported on that I assume either one are on the agenda later or will probably be in David's report. He's been pretty busy. But I want to remind people of very important events happening on Saturday. The Plant Exchange is on Saturday from 1 to 3. It's at the fire station, the Sue Beaner's Pavilion. It's a lot of fun if you've never been, and you don't have to bring plants to take some. But it's a good time to, just see people you haven't seen in a while, besides getting plants. The uncontroversial noise issue, we're still looking into whether or not the New York State criminal law 240, which refers to disorderly conduct, would apply to typical complaint situations in Danby. It's not as clear as most people think. It's all, how law enforcement interprets the law. Specifically, that law refers to public disturbance, so that wording lends itself to all sorts of interpretations, and it dictates whether or not law enforcement responds to complaints. So the board is still gathering comments and opinions from local law enforcement, which is varied. So I assume we'll be getting more information on that. Tomorrow, the public hearing on the 256 Bruce Hill Road conservation easements scheduled at the town board meeting. And lastly, it's not public yet, but I hear there's a rumor somebody might be opening a store at the Gathery. So whenever the public announcement comes out, we have to all support the person. So that's it.
Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to finish this one development review. And I don't know if there's any additional things you want to share with us, David?
Yeah, so since at your last meeting, you completed seeker and did the public hearing. And we were waiting on the General Municipal Law 239 review from Tompkins County, which they provided a few days after our meeting. And that letter, as you have reviewed it, includes a recommended modification. That modification included that the county recommend that the applicant identify building envelopes on the proposed lots that contain streams and wetlands so that that land can be excluded. Basically what they requested is that we follow our own process, which is for a standard subdivision that's 3 lots or more, we have to adopt a resource map that limits development in the most sensitive areas. And that was a part of your package, and I'm gonna put it on the screen in color. Looks a lot better in color. So in color, I didn't explain this in the thing because it'd be useless to talk about the colors, but you will notice the hatching also changes direction, if you can see it. But green with up and down hatching is the construction envelope, the area that building can happen. The red is the no build area. So that meets several criteria, including steep slopes, buffers from wetlands and streams. You can kind of see those building up underneath. And then the brown or orange with 45-degree cross hatching is the restricted build area. So that includes areas of forest, soil type, class 1 and class 2 soils. In Danby, we only have class 2. So there's a little bit of that class 2 soils in there, but mostly it's the forest that is calling for that. And it also is pretty, it's reasonably sloped, yeah.
I was saying that I think it's pretty, there's some steep sections in that area also that would restrict build.
Yeah, most of that orange area is less than 15%, which is our threshold for being forced into the red area. And I've reviewed this conceptually with the applicant and they didn't have any issue with it. So adopting this resource map, it's also referenced on our hard copy plats here so that any future buyer knows that development on the lot is limited by this map, which will be here in the town of Danby records. So the next step before we can give final approval to the plat is to approve the resource map.
And this just gets attached, right? It's not it's not documented on that
It's listed on this.
as a reference.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there a real wetland right here?
There is.
So should that not be in the construction envelope?
I did leave, I mean, it's a pond.
Okay.
Yeah. So we could, if you would like, I can modify that to be red hatching in the pond, but it is a pond.
Okay.
Any other questions?
This is already pretty much, this is already aligned with their plans anyway, right? It's
That's correct.
Yeah.
just kind of a future protection.
Mhm. And it's particularly in this case where they actually have the land to do more subdivisions. And we talked about the limitations on the subdivision, where they can't do any more than they could do otherwise. That was a condition of their variance. So even though they're creating one lot that's smaller than the 10 acres per lot that's allowed, the overall development is limited. With this, basically, most of the large remaining lot is in the restricted build and no build. There's a little bit in that field there. It's honestly the most appropriate place to build. It is possible that someone could come to the planning board later and want to amend this map. There's a process for the planning board to allow a certain amount of development in the restricted zone, and it has to be approved by a resource map amendment. And they have to actually know, what is the footprint that they're going to do.
You're good with it?
Pardon?
You're good with it?
Well, yeah, it's looking good, but, this isn't, you're not talking 229 East Miller Road.
Yeah.
We are, okay, I didn't hear that, I'm sorry. Everything, I just came here, we got everything situated, I understand, except for the county's okay. And that's what I'm here tonight for, and that's been taken care of. So
Yes.
throw me out now.
We need a motion to accept the resource map.
I'll make a motion to accept. Me, Kelly, sorry.
Can we have a second?
I'll second.
And then roll call.
Holbrook,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
David,
Yeah.
Lund,
Yes.
Nucci. Yes. Sweattick.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you.
The next step is actually approving the subdivision. Final plat. I've got our decision document here. There is already a condition in the variance, that if you feel like you need any additional conditions, this would be the time to discuss them, or someone can make a motion to approve or deny as submitted.
Motion to approve.
That's something about my life.
Roll call?
Yes.
Helen. Yes. David.
Yes.
Hunter.
Yes,
Nucci. Yes. Sweattick.
Yes.
we need to update that form.
We do, it has Alana. Fix that after.
Yep.
Excellent, that's done.
So we're all done?
Well done.
All right, thanks, everybody. They have to be glad. If they're waiting.
So David,
You just gotta put your mouth right on it, Scott. Just bring your mouth right to it.
will that light it up?
Yep, it doesn't light
Not
up.
light up, but it's working. Okay, just an academic question. So we could have not accepted the map and passed with 1+ majority in their letter here. I mean,
Our subdivision ordinance requires the map for 3 or more lots.
oh, okay, so we couldn't have done that
Yeah,
anyway.
They were just
Okay.
asking us to
I
do
saw
what we
that
were
in
already
the
gonna
writing,
do.
and it was the weirdest thing, yeah. Okay.
We're finished with that. So the rest of the meeting is to go over the results we got.
That's right.
And do we do that formally in this?
Yeah, I think so. So we can talk about the results. I'll just say a couple things about it, if that's okay.
Yes.
So the town board commissioned this survey of people's thoughts and opinions about short-term rentals. It was important to the town board that it was very neutral in tone. That's not common with short-term rental surveys, I will say. So we worked really hard to make it as open as possible. It was mailed to every person in the town and also put on Facebook and the South Hill Danby Facebook group and emailed to folks, and we did our best to get as many responses as we could. Our official end date was May 10th. What you have is everything that was in by May 10th. We got about 5 or 6 more since then. Setting that up was a real pain. So I don't know if I'm going to redo a document like that, but we do have it all available in the Google format, which is a little less pretty. But I also have the ability to show you any of those graphs as they've been updated. One of the things that made it difficult to make that is that the Google graphs don't include the full sentence because they're too long for a lot of the options. So you can hover in the Google form and it will show you the rest. But if you just copy the graphic out, then it doesn't tell you what each line is, which is kind of confusing. So overall, I think we had 163 submissions, and this one was 158 when it was shared. I'm gonna take a second and pull it up.
Is that
Or survey in a, that like a pretty decent response. So
It is.
okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's way better than most things that we do. I mean, I think our water survey got 12
Okay.
responses. So response rate was quite high. Obviously, it's a polarizing subject. I have to think while I put in my password.
I think no matter what
think no matter what the tone of some of the responses is very defensive, where I wish it could be communicated like, well, we haven't done anything yet, like,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
this is actually, you're not under attack, or like that was,
Right.
I don't know if you can communicate that in here. Yeah.
Yeah, it was reflective of that.
Did anyone?
Although-
The meeting about the notes?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So you're saying that's
Just
the
keep
way
feeling
people.
life,
respond.
liberty, pursuit of happiness, you know, it's, we also want.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got this up now. All right, so people were very, for the most part, happy to put in their names, their addresses, so we could tell that it wasn't the same person doing it over and over again. You know, I think we had 3 or 4 people who wouldn't put their name in. Unless people were super creative and coming up with names and addresses, I suppose it's possible. But I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure that we had a pretty good, no one trying to stack the deck.
Different handwriting.
Yeah, so Cindy took a bullet for the team and typed up all the hand delivered ones that were handwritten, which was a significant undertaking, but getting them all into this format means we can look at all the responses in a graph, which is fantastic and useful. So thanks to Cindy for doing that. I think it was probably a little enjoyable to read as well. So the first question we asked about, you know, what is people's connection to this? So almost all said they were residents. You could click multiple of these. 79% said they owned land in Danby. 11 of them, 6.7%, said they were short-term rental hosts in Danby. 8 of them, or 4.8%, said they were short-term hosts outside of Danby. Some of them, small number 6, have been guests of short-term rental in Danby. 25 had been short-term rental users or guests outside of Danby. 24 people who responded were interested in becoming a short-term rental provider in Danby. Only 1 outside of Danby, and 22 were long-term, non-short-term, like just regular landlords in Danby. We asked them.
Your form there, 'cause it's short, but the printed version has the whole thing. So I don't know if you had to reformat it or.
I had to
did
type it out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yep. That's why I'm not doing it again since we got 5
Got
more
it.
responses. Because I'd have to do that all over, which it was not the easiest because I don't have a good graphics editor. So I was doing it in our online docs thing that just like Word tries to guess for you what you want, and it's always wrong. So we asked people if they have experienced any positive or negative impacts. I'm not going to scroll through them, but you have all of the answers. And I think, you know, the short answer is most of them said they've had no negative impacts or they've had positive impacts. There were a few that said there had been some pretty horrendous incidents, or some people that were afraid of future impacts that hadn't happened yet. When we break down the question of whether we should allow short-term rentals with no regulations, with regulations, ban them, or people don't care, I would say the largest response was that we should allow short-term rentals with no regulations. That was 50% or 81 people. And 74 people said we should allow them with some regulations. And as we'll see in a minute, some people, they responded that they want lots of regulations, and some people responded that they want a small number of regulations. And 3 people said we should ban short-term rentals. And 4 people said they don't have a preference. I don't know why they filled out the survey, but they did. The next question was, if we were to create short-term regulations, which one should we think about? And the highest response for that was there should be no limits on short-term rentals whatsoever. So that was 64 people. 63 people said that we should require short-term rental operators to register with the town in some way. 60 people said we should require the operator to collect and pay lodging taxes. And just so you all know, they are required now to collect and pay lodging taxes. The town isn't checking up on that.
So it goes to the county.
It goes to the county. And anyone who rents with Airbnb automatically collects and submits those directly to the county. But people renting with, VRBO or HipCamp or any of the other platforms, they are required, though I don't have much to say about how much it is enforced, to collect a room tax for anyone who stays for less than, I think it's 30 days. Okay. 58 people, the next highest, thought the town should require an operator to notify neighbors or leave information on who to contact if concerns come up during a rental visit. There's kind of a cluster of questions here about should short-term rentals only be allowed on parcels where the owner lives, or should they be allowed anywhere, or should they only be allowed on really big parcels that can be buffered? People really didn't like the only allowed on very large parcels. Only one person agreed with that. 52 people said they should be allowed on any property, even if the owner resides somewhere else. And 45 people said it should only be allowed on property where the operator lives. The next highest ones, 36 people said the town should require that short-term rentals be inspected on a recurring basis. 34 people said that we should limit the number of rental days in a year. 33 people said that most properties should be allowed at least one short-term rental in addition to a home. And we can keep going down. 26% said the operator should be required to get a license. Interestingly, it's way less than register with the town, but making a licensing scheme is kind of the best way to get them to register with the town, but people may not know that. 25 people said the operator should be required to respond within 30 minutes. There were, looking through those, there were some people who said we should require a fast response, but 30 minutes is maybe a little too fast, like not necessarily reasonable. Maybe like an hour or 2 hours would be reasonable. 19 people, we should limit the number of short-term rentals. 18 people, the operator should be required to be on site during any short-term rental. And then just 14 people said that we should limit the location to certain parts of town. The next question was a bunch of things, and people were asked how important would it be for short-term rental regulations to address the following concerns. The number one concern that people have apparently is trash and litter. That got the highest, very important. I haven't done a graph of stacking somewhat and very important compared to not important, but you can kind of see as you go through the list where the first bar, which is blue, and if you have color, and the last bar, which is orange, is very important versus not important. So trash or litter was high on people's list of things that are important. Traffic impact was high on people's lists of things that were not important. People didn't really care if we increased the supply of short-term lodging. Didn't really care if we were regulated advertising and signs, or if it created a financial incentive to build. People did think that we should regulate large and special events, get a quick response to concerns, and require fire and building safety inspections. Definitely did not support limiting the number of consecutive rental days. And I guess depending on how you interpret this, either you could say 82% of people said long-term affordable housing supply is an important concern. 59 people said it was not. Anything else? Oh, regulate noise was another one where very important was higher than not important. And then we asked people if they have anything else to share, and you read that hopefully, and there's a lot of variety of opinion, but again, I think it mostly falls on wanting kind of limited regulations, if any. My general takeaway. So the task for the town board and the planning board is to decide what to do next. The town board asked if the planning board wanted to be involved. My understanding, I wasn't here at your meeting, but was that you generally decided you'd like to see the survey results and then decide if or how you would like to be involved. I can see that going a lot of ways. Any short-term rental regulations could be drafted by or in collaboration with this group. Could have a subset of this group join with a subset of the town board as the client committee for any regulations going forward. The town board could decide to take main ownership of that and then bring the planning board a draft and get your responses or your support or disapproval. There's a lot of ways that could go. And that's kind of what I'd like to open the floor to discuss. And maybe if you want to kind of summarize your general thoughts about the survey and what you read there, that'd be useful too.
I focused a little bit more on the added comments because I figured people that probably felt more strongly. So it's
Like most of the additional comments, people are pushing away from having regulations. And based
on the chart of what
regulations people
maybe wanted to see, it seemed to me like it was probably not a whole lot in
things that we would review,
like,
for giving a license, like we would review who has to get a license to have. So, I don't know, in my opinion, unless we were
limiting something like it can only be in these zones, which is more or less what we review, then I don't know how much involvement we need to have, but I don't know, that was just kind of my takeaway from the results and my interpretation of what I read.
I have a question, but not to just, so it seems like people don't want regulations, and the regulations we have are currently stricter for owner occupied. Like, can you undo a regulation? Like, what's the process for that? This could be one sweeping motion that. Okay.
Yeah, so part of what's confusing now is that we have this archaic term tourist home,
Right.
which we all dealt with on that recent approval. But one thing that we could do is we could either limit or remove that from the zoning code. One suggestion I've actually heard from some other planners is to not consider short-term rentals a use, but rather a licensed business. Because as we know, if a use is allowed, even by site plan review, it's allowed. Whereas with something that requires a license, if you have a problem with a particular person breaking whatever the rules are, you can revoke their license. You can't really revoke an allowed land use.
Yeah, I guess the other half of the other question that came, if that kind of thing proceeds, is there's people doing these things now, and like you said, like some of them are reporting to the county because they're forced through their platform. The ones that aren't through their platform, it's questionable if who does it fall on to within the town to follow up on those things, to then like burden someone in the town with the job of keeping up with all of that also.
Yeah, that is a concern, and I think that's a concern with any of the inspection things as well, as we kind of can barely do the inspections that we need to now.
Well, that's the other thing I was thinking when you said business, is like business have to have like an annual fire marshal walkthrough versus like a home doesn't have that.
Right.
So that would be another would be a benefit to the people who are concerned about the safety of the property, but then it would be a burden on the town, I guess the town or the county to do those inspections.
Yeah, I think it would most likely be Steve, our code officer, who would have to do them. So, I mean, there are ways that it can be dealt with if we, for example, charged a fee for a license that defrayed or covered. It probably wouldn't fully cover. You know, that's kind of up to the town board and how they structured it, but you could try to structure it so that it fully covers the costs of the inspection. And then the other thing is towns purchase data from these companies that basically have web bots that crawl the web pages of all these providers and come up with lists of what the listings are. So that's how we know that we have 91 listings, is because the county purchased some of this data. County purchased it with the idea of sharing it with all the municipalities. It's like, what a great thing. We can centrally purchase this data. But the county's attorney thinks that it's an invasion of privacy to provide that data. So they have it, but they can't give it to us. So we would have to buy it ourselves. So again, that could be something that would be wrapped into a licensing fee. That kind of helps, you know, you're basically charging the people who are following the rules to help you pay for going after the people who aren't following the rules. I think it's important with that the rules are very cut and dry. Like I know some towns have said like you can, you know, rent 60 days a year. There's like no way that we're gonna be able to know that and enforce it. Whereas if it's either yes or no, you can do it or you can't. We can find out if someone's doing it. But we can't really find out how many days a year. Yeah.
Right, like I think Dryden just requires a permit, because if you were a landlord, and then that's the thing.
Yeah.
One thing I was gonna say is, I this semester
I've been co-teaching a class with a professor in the planning department, looking at Ithaca and the new flood maps that FEMA's released a draft so far, but the new flood maps are coming out in places like 2/3 of the city in the flood risk zone. And while the city's planning to build walls around the creeks throughout the city, that will basically eliminate the flood risk, there's still a period of 5 to 7, maybe even longer years before those flood walls are designed, constructed, and then certified by FEMA. So there's a real concern that many people will be displaced from the community there because they're already on the borderline between losing their home due to gentrification and rising home values. So I think that, and I'm looking at that one question on the survey about affordable housing. And of course, one of the concerns with Ithaca is that they'll lose the tax base to the surrounding villages and towns, which is already happening, of course. And that, of course, has all kinds of implications. But I think I kind of agree on the side of fewer regulations around short-term rentals, but I do think that if Danby's going to think about this, they should also have a strategy for affordable housing, for ensuring affordable housing. I don't know if that's already in place, but I think those two things really need to be looked at together. And, you know, when you ask a question on the survey, I have a question about whether or not people really understand the implications. I mean, because if you never thought about it before, it wouldn't be really obvious that short-term rentals can actually eat up a lot of the available space for people that are looking for long-term rentals. And of course, you can get more money for short-term rentals. So it makes sense why people want to do it. But I do think we need to consider these issues that extend outside of Danby, but maybe impacting Danby in the future.
Yeah, I think it sounds like that was very thoughtful. I'll be musing over that after the meeting. I think first of all, I need to have terms a little bit clearer. So when does a short-term rental become just renting an apartment?
30 days.
Oh, a short-term rental can be, so there is okay. Otherwise, it's an apartment rental. Okay. And do we have some zoning requirements for apartments? rentals. Or not much, they just go with the building restrictions, okay? And, you know, thinking about tourist home today, I thought, yeah, we gotta get rid of that. And then I thought, wait a second, that has the, qualifier that it has to be the person's primary residence. And that has a lot going for it. You know, it sounds to me like we might not want to regulate at all. Somebody who has, you know, a back room in their house and a graduation or whatever, they rent it out and they get a little extra cash. But what about somebody who's an absentee owner who builds a structure for the express purpose of short-term rentals? It's in a neighborhood. All of a sudden, it really transforms the neighborhood. They're two vastly different situations that fall underneath the rubric of short-term rentals. So there's probably something that the town could do there to protect people, but still allow, you know.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, what you just described, is that the current regulations are the opposite of what you just said would be good, which is there's a bunch of process and regulations.
We could
you to
say
rent
that more,
Yeah.
these mics for me, I'm getting a hearing aid next month. The sound is.
Yeah,
I
the
hear
sound
it.
is difficult.
It goes up
The
and
ceiling's
gets
so high.
lost, and
Yeah.
it comes back fuzzy.
So right now, what you described as the thing that should have the least regulation, renting out a room in your house, is the thing that has the most regulation.
Right.
And if you
Okay.
buy up or build new homes, if you buy up existing homes or build new homes and rent them out full-time as an absentee landlord, there's no regulations or oversight currently in the town. So I think that there was some sense of that is wrong in the survey responses.
There were some comments about they shouldn't be able to rent it if they don't live here kind of thing, but I don't think you legally could separate that. Like, I
right.
feel like that would be some form of discrimination against property owners that would become an issue.
Right, so there are a lot of places that have made regulations, for example, against corporate ownership, or that you can only own so many properties that are short-term rental, or that you can only own a short-term rental operate a short-term rental in the town if you live in the town, those sorts of things. There has been one federal court case that has dealt with that, and they said it was unconstitutional. It wasn't in New York, it was in New Orleans. But it's very recent, but kind of the general legal guidance now is that all of those regulations are likely to fall. Some towns are still doing it anyway, so, you know, it's not, that doesn't mean the town of Danby couldn't do it, but our attorney doesn't recommend that we do.
But you mean just if they're resident, but what about owner occupied versus not owner occupied? Does that fall under the same thing you're saying?
No, so that is, well, owner occupied versus not owner occupied. Basically, what the courts have said is that with land use regulations, we should be addressing land use, not ownership.
Yeah.
So you could have a land use regulation that says someone needs to live there full time in order to have a short-term rental. Like that short-term rental is only accessory. You can't have a property that's just short-term rental. But you could also long-term rent out the other unit. You can't really require, well, you can't. Lots of places do require owner occupancy, but it's not standing up well in court.
Also, personally, I don't like staying at short-term rentals in the owners center.
Well, and that one of them has a commercial now that is explicitly like, we don't rent out properties where the owner is on site. Like that is their whole marketing campaign right now, is that it's not like they don't support ones that, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so party away.
Yeah.
There's actually an ad.
Yeah.
Is that the one you're
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. You get to go there and there's nobody there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is a way to consider and address the impact on affordable housing. I will say, as the planner, I get calls from people looking to buy a property that, you know, they're willing to pay one price if they could rent it out full time, and they'll pay more if they can, you know, divide it into 3 short-term rentals that each one would make more than the one they could rent out otherwise.
Right.
So it definitely creates competition for people who are looking to buy, especially at the medium and bottom of the market.
So I felt like in reading through it, it was great that so many people answered, but it also felt to me, and all the questions that you came up with really made you think about, well, how does this affect the community and stuff? And I'm not sure that certainly people answered what they answered now, but it seemed like there were a few people who were like, gee, I didn't even know so many people were doing this. So I think to me that skews what we got a little bit, and in terms of people's opinions about it. And I do have concerns about, particularly on a road like ours. I mean, I live on Gunderman Road. If people started to rent those, they're all pretty close together, and noise factors and rubbish.
There's
and-
one down the road from you.
Right, I know. And dogs who are not kept on leashes are issues. And so as much as I think we shouldn't be involved, I also think we need to think some about how do we want the community to end up? And you know, you come out to an area like this, not looking for some of the kinds of stuff I think you deal with in a more compressed living situation.
I also kind of took that like the opposite way, in that if there's that many happening and you don't know they're happening, then it's probably not so much of an issue because you're not even aware that there's that much of it happening. Like you don't even, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I also think,
but, oh.
no,
go-
you
no,
can,
you-
But if it increases, then that could change. I
But you
mean,
have that doesn't forego that there's still gonna be those situations.
Right.
That
Right.
could be troublesome, they could
Yeah.
be 10%
right.
of the.
I mean, I will say our neighborhood mostly doesn't have rentals, but there was a time period where a house that's fully owned now was, I think, a month to month, or maybe it was a longer term rental. We had more issues with those tenants than we did with the people who were there for graduation weekend. So I think it can go, I mean, it can be a full-time neighbor, like it can be anybody, you never know who's gonna be the problem.
Yeah, I did have someone also point out, you know, we don't ask the operator of a factory to respond to problems within 2 hours or tell all their neighbors what their home address is to contact them.
Yeah.
that's just above camera.
Yeah.
Do you like your neighbors? Do they like you? It just.
Were you gonna say something?
Well, I do, I guess I will say with the affordability thing and just I think this trend of people doing this as an investment is waning because of the affordability issue anyway. I think that that's already kind of eliminating. I do get buyers shopping for short-term rentals. They live in the city or they live in a different country or wherever. And I talk to them and they're like, what's the average stay? Like, it's really cold here, you know, and I think I don't think they make enough money, the amount of times that they can rent it. I think in the city they do. I think that's probably why it's a bit more, you see it more there, but I think there's some areas too, like, by Hector gets a lot, but I think in Danby, I
Like
don't
a
know.
winery.
Yeah, I just think Danby is not a hot spot for it. I know we have 91, but I don't know that there's like this pressure for more. But affordable housing is like a huge issue, and I don't know how.
I also would be curious, like, I don't know how many of them that are operating now, like what the age is of the people who are renting them. Because I could see if it's people who are in retirement that are renting to like make a second income as part of retirement, that if I were that person at a certain point, either I'm not gonna wanna do it at all, or I'd rather rent to a long-term person that I'm not having to like turn your house around every week during the summer to get another renter in. Like it's also, like I know other people that live other places that have them, and it's a burden and it's a job every week to like turn it around for the next person to come in and be ready for the season for the, so like if it's a lake house for the season, to get your house ready and like back on the market. Yeah. Yeah,
I think that's the tricky thing. Because it does make owning a home more affordable. So people who
Right.
are on the borderline between being able to afford a house at all, having a short-term rental would help a lot,
Yeah.
right? Potentially.
And I do hear from people who, you know, they own a house with an accessory dwelling unit and they had a bad experience with long-term tenants. And so they go to short-term rental and then they have a bad experience with short-term rental and they go back to long-term tenants. But it is something that people kind of interchange when they have that kind of flexible housing.
Or you're like, is it Aurora? And we rented for him where he long-term rents month to month from October to May, and then he short-term rents through the summer.
Mhm.
Well, also with the good cause eviction, I don't know, that might make a shift, landlords unloading. Or since the pandemic anyway, you know, there's a
Yeah.
lot more multi-units on the market than I think there had been. And then there's this good cause eviction, which, not to get too like derailed into this, but it makes it so the way it's written now in its bill, it's not passed, is that you'd have like a perpetual lease. And then also, rent stabilization. So, you know, landlords won't like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe they would be like, no, I have this unit. I can afford it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm also hearing, and it's very, like, at the national level, there is some evidence that we've oversaturated the market because it's kind of an easy, low barrier to entry. You can get in and you think you're gonna make money, and then, you know, some people are making money, people with, you know, if you have a really cool house, like a A-frame or something that people will get excited about the pictures of the Adirondack chairs by the lake, then you may still have, you know, low vacancy, but
I think we talked about this before too, with like the pandemic ending, like people, that market exploded because people didn't want to be near other people. And like now that people are socializing again and going to larger places, like
Yeah.
Disney World exploded this
Yeah.
year because people are finally like open to going to large
Right.
crowded places again, where before people were trying to get out of their house finally, but they didn't want to be where there was other people.
right.
Mhm.
So
So-
hotel occupancy is up.
Yeah,
And then also people are starting to get annoyed with all the tricks and the short-term rental platforms, like, you know, it's $40 a night, but there's a $700 cleaning fee.
yeah.
And there's another realm that we should at least think about. And that is the tent camping or glamping or whatever, and they, you know, those situations can even more readily morph into something pretty problematic for the community.
How does the
You
town
know,
of
they got a
Ithaca,
couple rental johns, but they don't really come and pick them up, and you know, and people, the one respondent there, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, you know, people were walking in her back mud room, lost, and those all, you know, seem to accrue from this tent camping. So that's a whole nother can of worms, it seems.
do you know how the town of Ithaca deals with the one at La Tourelle?
I don't. I know it had an extensive permitting process. And it's complicated from like a building versus
Yeah.
planning perspective. I know from a building perspective, they have building permits for the platforms, but not for the tents. I don't know if they did like a planned development zone for it or how, if they have a campground use, because that is another thing that a lot of towns have and we don't have is some kind of, you know.
I mean, that's the other thing that's picking up right now is RV camping.
Mhm.
Like they're popping up all of quite a few over on Seneca Lake, I know, and other lakes around as well.
Yeah, and we've had interest, and that's actually what started conversations about short-term rentals before complaints about people who were afraid of one that was coming, was that we should have a way to tell people what the rules are for, you know, tenter or somebody who wants to have I've had multiple people who want to have treehouse businesses in Danby.
Treehouse.
Yeah,
So how does that work from like a health department standpoint then?
Yeah.
Like, that's what I was just wondering, like, where's
so
that?
there's a threshold for the health department of how many units you have, that once you pass over a certain number, you have to have health department inspectors come and review everything. If you're, you know, just a couple tents, you don't meet that threshold, but for example, the Zen Center has surpassed that threshold and they are considered a public water system. And they actually had an issue with, if you are that and you have other adjacent parcels, like they bought a house next to them, now that house is considered a part of the public water system and has to be inspected and certified annually and go through a whole rigmarole that it wouldn't if there was space between it and the other parcel. So there is a whole layer of, the health department has, you know, at the state level has decided what's a potentially unhealthy density of this stuff that needs regulations, and then if it's less, then you don't.
So that's for like tents, you're saying?
Yes,
So that
or for any kind of lodging,
I had
really,
like a-
cabins or.
Yeah, I had well, someone built a cabin, but they built it, this was actually Dryden, so it was, you know, there was regulations, but the health department basically was like, they had a saying that everything goes all like gray water, and then the toilet was composting, but it wasn't the one type of composting you're allowed to have. But they're like, all of your water, any water that comes out of your house is gray water. And so it has to be in a septic system.
Yeah,
But you're saying it doesn't.
Yeah, and these,
I just get
I mean, do
confused
they
how-
go in the house to use to get water and go to the bathroom? How does it?
it depends on how
People
it's set up.
using porta johns, or are they digging latrines?
I don't know of anyone taking latrines. There certainly
They
are.
gotta go.
Yeah. I think there's a variety of ways. So
Yeah.
I think, Colleen, there's a difference between the health department is involved with every house or anything like that.
Right, this was a house that had a cabin, so it wasn't
Yes.
just like a standalone.
Right.
And
And there isn't anything different about a cabin than a house.
which, so the person who, I mean, this, I'm not gonna leave, this person built it under the size requirement that it would need like an inspection. or
Yeah.
whatever. And
That's it.
Dryden wasn't having it, you know,
Sure.
this is what he thought he was doing.
Yeah, so there is, I know what you're talking about. So under 144 square feet, buildings that are not for occupancy,
Right, well, this-
that are for storage, like a shed, don't require a building permit, and sometimes people get confused. If you have 144 square foot or less building, but you design it, you know, with plumbing and electricity and for someone to sleep in, it still needs,
Lodging.
yeah.
I was never thinking about. it.
Yeah. So there's one set of health code regulations for like these larger group accommodations, and that kicks in above what's required of like just a single family home. So just a home with a cabin would be like just having two homes.
Right,
But New York State is not very progressive in my mind when it comes to things like gray water or being off grid or.
so I guess, so you're saying it's different if someone has a house and then they set up a camp, it's different than if someone just has a land parcel and they set up. camps.
It's the number of camps. So like if someone had a house and like 2 tents, that would be different. Then I don't remember what the threshold is, but I think it's, yeah, I was gonna say 5. So if you have 5 or more, then there's this additional set of regulations. But one of the things for the town to decide is that a use and is it allowed? Because right now it's not a defined use, and
The over 5 or the under 5 or anything.
anything that's not a house.
So the summer that my daughter decided to live in a tent out in our backyard because she didn't want to be in the house with us.
Been there, done
I
that.
didn't know.
But if it's
She
not,
still had a bedroom
if
in
it's
her
not
house. so.
defined, is it allowed or not allowed?
Not allowed,
It's not allowed.
unless it could be interpreted as like a customary
Yeah,
incidental use to residential occupancy, because like, we don't say that you're allowed to have trails in your forest, but
Right,
you can.
but there are, so like the town of Ulysses does not have any language for short-term rentals, but there are short-term rentals, and I called once about it, and they're like, it's not allowed, it's not.
Yeah, right. So,
But then they're not enforcing it.
right,
So that means you can do what you want and you're not gonna get enforced.
Right, you're not allowed to do it, but no one's gonna enforce it, which is kind of how we operate now, right?
so the way we operate now for a standalone house is there is a previous planner's official interpretation that stood up and wasn't challenged within the challenge time frame. That short-term rental of a whole dwelling is the same as long-term rental.
Oh, okay.
So that's why you can rent out a whole house with no process. But if you want to rent out part of your house, that meets the definition of a tourist home. So I guess the part of the question is how we all feel about it. But the second part is, what involvement do you want to have, either as a subgroup of planning board members or as the whole planning board? Something that, I guess I could take it back, but Leslie and Joel are here, so you can just tell them what you think about this group or subset of this group being involved in deciding what to do next. And I'll note, this is advice to them. They can do whatever they want because they're the town board. But I think they're interested in your opinion about.
I think if we volunteer, Joel's gonna say, okay, you're it.
It's somewhat of a complicated issue.
So here's a thought. This is just a proposal. My ego is not involved in it at all. If it gets done, fine. I would suggest that we communicate back to the board. Tell them that we looked at the survey and that we discussed the results of the survey. And I got a feeling we're all of the same mind here, that we acknowledge that there's a widespread sentiment to not overregulate bed and breakfast, and that we support that. But there are also things that the board might want to consider. The effect on housing prices. The specific problem with tent camping and the kinds of situations that can accrue there. Absentee owners, if we can do anything about that. And whatever other things that we have kind of, so if we communicated that to the board and said, yeah, we're still, if you want some of us to work on the specifics of of an ordinance or whatever. Does that sound palatable to?
But do we have a volunteer or two
So
to
it's with
work
them.
with them? Because
Well, I don't, maybe they don't want any of us, but we could offer.
I
They're
think
right there. Let's just,
What?
we could ask them, they're here.
Joel and
Oh, they're right
Leslie
there.
are on there.
They're doing something else, they're washing the dishes or whatever.
Actually, 3 out of 5 are here because Catherine's here as well. Yeah. I mean, I think there was a genuine desire to know, to what extent you'd like to be involved. This discussion has been very helpful, I think, but it doesn't. What it doesn't help us understand whether you want to be engaged in what degree in deciding what to do.
So, Joel, I have a question. If someone or someones are interested in being more involved, what is your plan or what are your thoughts about? Are you going to hold separate meetings from town board to work on this as a subcommittee, or exactly what is it going to be structured like? Because it really is a time commitment. So it would be helpful to know kind of how you're going to do that.
Yeah, well, that would be the topic of discussion tomorrow at the town board meeting, because we haven't, I mean, we're seeing this report at the same time you are. And we haven't had a board discussion about how we would handle it. And of course, that's partly going to be informed by what you wanted the degree of involvement that you wanted to have. So if the sense was that the planning board wants to be actively engaged, then that might influence how the board feels about how to proceed. And say, okay, well, maybe then a joint committee would make sense. As opposed to if you just want to comment on whatever we come up with, that might lead us in a different direction.
Okay. Well, what are people's thoughts? I mean, it is a time commitment.
It'll be a fun project, though.
Or do we need to think about what it's going to look like and then decide?
Can we, I'm brainstorming there, can we share it?
I
And
can't
then
hear
come
you.
back and report to the planning board so that one or two of us doesn't have to go to all the meetings? In other words, we'll send somebody from the planning board when their subcommittee meets, but it can be different people. Because I
Rotate.
wouldn't mind doing that. I missed that.
I said it sounds like Scott's volunteering.
So what that
Well,
means is,
the one meeting,
that means that
the
no
last
one
one,
is
but
going
I'm
to do,
last.
yeah, no one is going to do all the meetings, but
Yeah,
take turns going and being part of it. Yeah, that seems fair.
It seems fair. It doesn't seem very workable, though. Because how would anybody be abreast of what's going on unless they were
Well,
actively participating in the whole process?
because the planning board person who goes will report back.
Like one planning board member would act as a liaison
Yeah,
to the planning
that's
board
right.
on the
Liaison.
short-term rentals.
Yeah,
Or one at a time.
we're a tight knit group. We'll-
And we can put it on our agenda for the planning board, and the person who's gone will keep the whole planning board informed and give feedback if we need to.
We could even do an email after the meeting, couldn't we? Yeah, that's legal. Yeah,
It would just be reiterating public meeting information.
It's one way and not that.
Okay, yeah.
So your meeting is tomorrow night?
Right.
I guess it would be good to have like a sense of like the timeline.
Yeah, it would.
I'm just thinking, sorry, I'm just thinking it's like, it's about to be summer, and that's where I'm coming from. So I'm curious how long this will take or what.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes down to, we're still at the point where the town board could decide to do nothing.
Yeah.
They could
And we
decide
don't know.
to do, yeah.
Mhm. So it sounds to me like it might be something that after you all meet tomorrow night, that we get a little more information on and then kind of figure out how we can interface with you.
Yeah, it does mean, though, that we may decide, unless we want to take this in a really slow way, getting it organized is probably something I would hope would happen tomorrow night and get underway, and then it'll, unfold over however long it takes. But I had the same sense you did in reviewing the information and the responses, which is that there's a general sense that we don't want to regulate a whole lot. But there's still that, I regard as an inconsistency in that, you can rent a whole unit for however long you want with no regulation at all. But if somebody lives there, that, is the owner or the and then it's a tourist home and you have to go through all the, additional steps of site plan review, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I suppose we could remove that. I suppose that, deregulating is a possibility. But the other thing that Scott alluded to, which was unfortunately not, I thought of this when I was taking the survey myself, even though we carefully reviewed it ahead of time, we didn't have a whole lot in there that would ask people about scale. Now, it might be okay with somebody renting their house out or the house next door, but what about the campgrounds, and the RV plazas or something? If you have a whole bunch of units, you might feel different about having it in your neighborhood. And we didn't really ask people about that specifically. And the way the thing was structured, it sort of got people thinking in terms of renting units that already exist, and renting dwelling units. Frankly, it didn't even elicit a whole lot of thought about what about the the RV parked in the driveway. What about the cabin in the back, or tenting? We don't basically allow these things unless it's a family gathering or something, and you're not charging anybody. But we also know that it's happening, and what we do about that, I didn't get a whole lot of guidance out of the responses to the survey from on those points. So I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that, but I do think it's important that we deal with it.
Mhm.
So the on the question of do it, it's unlikely that the town board will want to do this as a committee of the whole. Could be done that way. If we do it as a committee, with or without planning board people, we would probably want to limit it to a couple of people, because otherwise we have a quorum of the board and you're conducting town business and it's a meeting. But it could be a committee of a couple town board people, a couple planning board people, or it could be just a committee of one or maybe just one town board person working with the planner to come up with some proposals, and then having both boards review options. Those are all possibilities.
All right. Thanks, Joel.
I guess just in terms of keeping the process moving, as a person who will be at home with her kids by herself tomorrow night, is it possible to get the outcome of that without having to wait for the final minutes to get approved or come back to this meeting next month?
Yeah.
You can attend virtually, if you'd like, and in real time, and you can look at the recording in any event.
In theory, with a 3-year-old talking in my ear the whole time.
Yes,
Young
right.
Children love Zoom meetings.
Yeah. If you ask for the video, you can see the video, and if you're content with the audio, the audio should be available pretty quickly. And Janice has an automatic transcription service too, so you can even look at the transcript.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll share a synopsis with the board by email.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So are we done with this? We need the plan.
I think so.
Report.
Lovely. So the first thing to report on is at an upcoming event. We received a grant from Tompkins County for writing more grants, similar to before. We chose a consultant. They're called Choice Words. They have a new office in downtown Ithaca, and they're from the Hudson Valley area mostly. We need to get that moving. It took a long time to get started, and grant deadlines kind of start late summer and go into the fall. So we're planning next week on the 24th and the 25th to have 2 simultaneous nights of events. These will both be at the fire halls, and there'll be one in West Danby and one in Central Danby. West Danby will be the 24th at 7, and Central Danby will be the 25th at 7. You're the first to, well, other than Joel, to know exactly the details of this, and advertising will go out tomorrow. We'll do our best to get the word out. Realize it is short notice, but we do kind of just have to make it happen. And the purpose of these meetings is to inform people a little bit about the kinds of grants that are available and the kinds of things that could be funded, and then to have conversations around the future of the hamlets and what kind of things people think is the most important priorities to help guide us in deciding what grants to go after. It's not going to be a vote for your favorite grant, because obviously people can't be that informed. But we're going to kind of take the thoughts and goals and values of those community meetings and try to apply them to the programs that are available that we think we can be competitive and get an application done. And our grant writer will be writing at least one grant and also kind of giving us some information about what things we need to do to be ready for other grants that we might not be ready for now in future years. So yeah, that's next week. That's Wednesday and Thursday evenings. They are both going to be potluck. Unfortunately, what I really wanted is for the town to like buy a bunch of pies and tell people to come and have pie and talk to us. That was what I put in my grant to the county, and they said, this is all great, except you can't do any of the fun stuff. We don't want to pay for it. Even if not paying for it costs the same amount, they don't want to pay for those specific things. And there's some problems with using town tax dollars to do that as well. It can be considered gifting. So we're going old school potluck style, and you know, it's not a barrier. If you can't bring something, come anyway. And you know, I don't know what, I'll make something big and we'll get other town board members to bring stuff, and you know, we'll kind of keep it low key and yeah, bring something if you want, come and hang out and you know, participate. I think we're gonna try to keep it to like an hour and a half. So it's not gonna be all night, but it's a chance to kind of meet neighbors and have some conversation around this, and also like remind people of this vision the town has of hamlets and how they can be, and the things that, the way they used to be and the things that they could be again, and what we need to get there. 7 p.m. Yeah, it's too late for the newsletter. So we're going to do everything we can with email and Facebook, and maybe we're going to try to get the participation of the community councils and, you know, see what we can do to get the word out. I'll copy you guys all on that stuff. We do have a pretty extensive email list at this point. I hope so. Yeah. We're flying by the seat of our pants a bit on this, but I think it's better just to get it done than let it hang out there for another month. So that's should be fun and should be interesting and should be exhausting for those of us that are going to both nights in a row after another meeting on Wednesday, but Tuesday, EZA on Tuesday. So that's that program. The CDBG homeowner rehab program, we have 19 applications from income qualified folks, 14 spots. So we already know we have more applications than spots, which could inform we could just apply for more money for that program. That could be what we do. The first several properties are going through their initial testing. They have to be tested for lead and asbestos and get an energy audit and build a scope of work of all the stuff that needs to be done. And then
I thought that gathering was only for people who lived in the core.
No, it is a priority to talk about the core, and we're going to do our best to get people from the hamlets there, but we're not limiting attendance.
Sorry, I was actually not realizing I was talking out loud to you guys, but I really didn't know that was I really thought it was just the core. Oh, well,
Okay.
I am talking to you now.
Okay.
Misunderstanding. So we're all bringing food.
Well, that was the way it was described, is only for the hamlets. At the last.
It's about the
meeting.
hamlets.
No, it was only for the hamlet people. That was the wording. It was only for the people in the hamlets, and they would be invited.
I'm not. Yeah, we're
Where
going
did
to
you hear it
promote
other than here?
Yeah. So yeah, we have the first bill from our homeowner rehab program, and soon those first several properties will be coming to the town board for final approval for moving forward. So it's good to see that going. Our consultant is doing well on that, I think.
So the surveys are all covered, the testing's all covered under the grant as well.
Correct, yeah. Which, you know, it's a lot of work to get to the point of knowing exactly what the project is to bring it to the town board, so it is a little awkward to then say, hey, will you approve this thing that we did a whole bunch of work on? But you kind of have to do that to know, to get to the point with the homeowners that they really understand exactly what this will mean, that kind of stuff. Another program that I'm working on, we want to grant with most of the other municipalities in Tompkins County for a Safe Streets for All study. I'm on the review committee for consultant selection for that. We have 5 I expect to be very good answers to that RFP. We are opening them. They were open today, but I haven't looked at them yet. So the review of that will happen over the next 2 weeks, and we'll have a consultant to move forward with that. And then finally, our septic oriented development, our Hamlet wastewater study is grinding on, but moving towards its end. We have a draft study, and we're starting to work on figuring out what funding could be applied for, because the most important part of that is understanding what the cost per dwelling equivalent is, which is widely dependent on how much grants you can get. So if you get grants to pay for 75% of it, then it could seem like a really good plan. And if, you know, people have to pay for 100% of it, then there's basically no way in heck that it's going to happen. So that's kind of where that is in process. And I'm working on a bunch of other stuff, but I think those are the most important things right now. Do you guys have any questions about planning department work?
Sounds like you got a vacation.
Before you started all this.
Does the FEMA mapping change affect the wastewater study at all, or not really?
Not really. I mean, it does create another incentive to do it, because there's going to be people whose septic fields are in the 100-year flood zone where Buttermilk Creek wasn't mapped before. So, I mean, they were still in the flood zone geologically speaking, but legally speaking, they weren't.
Right. Okay.
That may help with grants, particularly like brick building resilient infrastructure, having safer options so that, you know, when it's flooding, you're not flooding someone's septic into their well, for example, or their neighbor's well.
Right.
All right.
Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. We're gonna adjourn.
It's up to you. You're the chair.
We're gonna adjourn.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
What's the solar sign?